Welcome back to the Fourth Wall Podcast. My name is Zach. With me is Cody. Cody, even a blind squirrel finds an acorn every once in a while. In this situation, our blind squirrel is Netflix.
That's right. Netflix, after making many just okay movies, may have finally made a good one. A phoenix has emerged from the ashes. Not Dark Phoenix, the new X-Men movie. That is still very much in the ashes. We'll get to that in a minute. But before we get into what we thought, Zach, can you tell us a little bit about I Am Mother?
After an unspecified extinction event takes place, a bunker facility filled with thousands of human embryos designed to repopulate the Earth activates. There's a maternal robot in the facility.
This facility was designed to give humanity a second chance, one that began with you.
And it begins to grow a human embryo. So this robot, it's programmed to raise, educate, and evaluate humans, and immediately when this movie starts, something doesn't feel right. My expectations are just so low for Netflix movies. I thought the cinematography would be crisp, and maybe it would have a modern feel and the premise to be interesting. Well, plus you told me about this movie, and so I thought it would be, at least pretty pretentious, but this movie was actually a pleasant surprise to me, and it really scratched that sci-fi itch. It's one of those movies when you're watching it, you're just watching it, you're like, this is dumb, this character could have just done this, and then when you're thinking that, the next scene or conversation, they'll answer that question, and they'll kind of like prove your question wrong and then bring up a whole new different question that you have to think about. And you're like, oh, I didn't even think of this. And it just keeps going like that.
Yeah, absolutely. They did a really good job of that. And everything in the movie kind of like made sense in a way. Clearly, this was written to be an allegory. And it weaves several familiar stories together, including like the prodigal son, but with a little bit of a twist, maybe like a little Black Mirror spin on the prodigal son story. They did make some interesting choices with what they chose to reveal to the main character and even the audience. And the story doesn't really go like other versions of the person in the bunker that we've seen before. I really like that it's a brand new concept. It's not like a franchise or anything just yet. It is Netflix, so we'll see. We want to avoid spoilers here if you haven't seen it. So, Zach, what's another movie that maybe has like a similar aesthetic that we can talk about? Maybe even could be paired with this movie in something like a double feature.
I'd say I Am Mother draws a lot of inspiration from the classic sci-fi movies. For example, the whole human-robot relationship has a lot of parallels to the astronauts and HAL in 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
There's a lot of parallels there, and even the robot in I Am Mother has this like eyeball thing on its face, and it looks just like the red light computer thing in 2001: A Space Odyssey. But for a double feature, I would say Ex Machina would probably pair well. I Am Mother is definitely more hardcore sci-fi than Ex Machina, but they are both on the topic of the dangers of AI. They both take you on a ride of AI mind games as well as sort of human 3D chess mind games too.
I can see that. That would be a pretty good pairing. This movie does have Ex Machina beat in story and pacing, though, I think, for sure. Like that movie, you never really know who the good guy is and who the bad guy is, and that kind of keeps things interesting and keeps the story moving. I do think you're right, though. I Am Mother is hardcore sci-fi. The concepts they explore in this movie are a lot more interesting than one long movie about the Turing test, which I felt like Ex Machina was a little bit. And that movie kind of ends pretty much like you would expect it to. For a while, we got a whole slew of these movies. The artificial intelligence type movies, starting with the absolutely awful Transcendence starring Johnny Depp. And then the little bit better Her with Joaquin Phoenix and Ex Machina. All kind of share similar themes. And all of them ended the same way, Oh no, AI is taking over the world. Whatever will we do?
I haven't seen Transcendence, but Her was pretty weird and cool. I Am Mother is probably better than that, but I don't think I Am Mother is as good as Ex Machina. Ex Machina is arguably a classic. There's the ultra-modern house. It's in the middle of the forest surrounded by mountains with like a creek flowing under it. Ex Machina might be my favorite Oscar Isaac character as well. He plays that tech billionaire guy who basically invented Google of the movies kind of universe when he was in middle school. And I wouldn't brush off Ex Machina as a simple Turing test movie. Like, there's definitely Turing in it, and it's a part of the movie, but it's more about consciousness. There's a lot of conversation in it, especially when Oscar Isaac is going crazy about like human thinking processes. And I'm not saying this movie is providing any great insight about the dangers of AI, but it definitely got the masses thinking about AI more. And so that's why I think those two would be a good double feature.
No, definitely. I do think it got people thinking about AI and some of those interesting questions, if they hadn't already been thinking about it from the other movies that are like this. I Am Mother, though, I think asks a little bit different questions than some of those other movies. You know, it's almost like it knows you've already seen those, and so it's picking up where they left off. The question this movie asks is, what do we do after that man versus technology conflict has been resolved? You know, robots are kind of the same in this one as other movies. They look a little bit like GLaDOS from Portal.
Feel free to slow down and do whatever it is you do when you're not destroying this facility.
But I Am Mother felt bigger to me than Ex Machina. Ex Machina costs about $15 million, and I can see this movie being around there, if not a little bit more. You know, Netflix doesn't release budgets, but they just got so much more up on the screen, I think. The director said this movie is almost entirely practical effects, which you could definitely tell. It all felt real. There was nothing on screen that I didn't believe. Another interesting thing that I think may be overlooked in this movie is that every character, until a good way into it, is female. The female robots, female occupants of this underground bunker facility. I haven't really seen a good film in this genre that has tried that. So kudos to them, because most people wouldn't even notice. And it's something that really gives the film its unique character.
Yeah, this movie was filled with themes of maternity and motherhood and the process of bringing humans into the world. And like you said, pretty much every character was a female, but it wasn't in your face about it. With a movie like Captain Marvel, all anybody talked about was Brie Larson and her tweets and her interviews. And we didn't talk at all about Captain Marvel being a good matchup for Thanos in the final Avengers movie. Luckily, this movie, I Am Mother, avoided all that noise. You know, when I watch a movie, I don't like the feeling of need to pick a side of some political mudslinging match, and instead I can just like think about the movie itself.
There's something called the Bechdel test that asks whether a movie has at least one scene where two women talk to each other about something other than a man, or something other than what a man is currently doing. You would think this would be fairly common. If you think back to some of your favorite movies, you'd think that there are lots of these types of scenes. But I went back and kind of thought about some of my favorite movies, and it was pretty rare that the movie would contain that kind of a scene. Movies like The Matrix. We hear about a scene where Trinity talks to the Oracle, and that could count if it was shown. But the only thing we hear from that conversation is that Trinity likes Neo. You know, I can see why she likes you.
You're cuter than I thought. I can see why she likes you.
There's one scene where Trinity and Switch do exchange words in the car about extracting the bug from Neo's belly.
You're gonna lose it.
No, I'm not.
So they're talking to each other, but really the topic is getting the tracker out of Neo. So would it pass this test? Probably not. An interesting thing is, some research has been done, people have looked into this, and analyses have indicated that passing the Bechdel test can be an indicator of the film's financial success.
Okay, so I Am Mother pretty much totally passed the Bechdel test, but I mean, this test, like, does the passing of this test change your opinion of the movie? Are you saying that a movie needs to pass the Bechdel test to be a good movie?
No, of course not. 12 Angry Men, fantastic movie.
Wow, another one of your pre-penicillin movie references.
I want to see as many different types of movies as possible, and I'm interested in looking at movies from the statistician's point of view. Some people say that takes all the fun out of it, analyzing art using statistics. But with I Am Mother, you do kind of get the sense that something is missing from the beginning. And the whole movie is about getting that thing back. Now, is it the patriarchy that's missing? No. I mean, it's a lot of things. But in general, I think this was a win for Netflix and a fairly minor milestone in streaming because it's made in the style of a small blockbuster. So I'm interested, do you think, Zach, that this could have been a hit at the box office?
I Am Mother maybe could have turned a profit, but a hit, sadly, no. A part of me wants to say that it could sort of ride the intellectual thriller wave of Us, which Us made $250 million. But these sort of all-in sci-fi movies don't exactly make Marvel numbers. Ex Machina made $37 million. Her made $48 million. And that movie High Life with Robert Pattinson that just came out, that hasn't even made $2 million yet. But the box office is like impossible to predict sometimes. Dark Phoenix, the latest and last 20th Century Fox X-Men movie, just flopped. Some background and context: Disney now owns 20th Century Fox, which owned X-Men.
Yeah, and these movies usually make a ton of money. It's in its second weekend now, and it's only up to almost $150 million worldwide. And it had a budget of $200 million.
Yeah, I saw somewhere where it had the lowest opening weekend by $20 million of all 12 of the Fox comic book movies. That's including all the X-Men's, Deadpool, Fantastic Four. Dark Phoenix was the worst opening weekend.
If we include marketing costs, this movie could lose about $150 million overall. What was once a remarkable franchise, with excellent entries like Logan, it's officially dead.
Yeah, now that the Disney plague has successfully infected X-Men, the path is clear for it to just spread and destroy the rest of cinema. Star Wars was tough to lose, and still the Disney virus continues to grow. Symptoms of the virus include shameless remakes, Will Smith as Genie, purple-haired ship commanders in Star Wars. People want to know, can the Disney plague affect me? Unfortunately, yes. There are currently millions of moviegoers believing they're viewing original and quality content. How can you find out if you've been infected? If you think that a Marvel movie should win Best Picture, then that means you're a late-stage carrier. Is there a cure? There's no known cure, but local movie shamans suggest combating the Disney plague by watching a few foreign films, a few of the old school classics, and of course, listening to the Fourth Wall podcast. In all seriousness, though, Cody, Disney is already a blockbuster juggernaut, and it's only getting bigger. So what should we do about this? How can we stop Disney?
Steven Spielberg has been quoted as a Netflix skeptic.
Once you commit to a television format, you're a TV movie. You certainly, if it's a good show, deserve an Emmy, but not an Oscar.
But I'm seeing Netflix as one of the only studios that is at least trying to do something different. Along with Annapurna, A24, Lionsgate, and even Sony Pictures to some extent, these studios are trying to carve out a niche. And they're making all kinds of movies that Disney wouldn't make. And so that's good. I just worry a little bit about the studios who are trying to go head-to-head with the Mouse House. Paramount is very quickly running out of franchises. They have Mission Impossible, which maybe has another 2 to 3 movies. Transformers, which has not been performing for them at the box office lately. You had Bumblebee. It was a hit with critics, but it didn't really make any money.
Yeah, maybe Michael Bay is a genius after all, if he can get the Transformers movies to make money.
Could be. He knows how to get those butts in the seats. Warner Brothers, of course, is the other big studio that's trying to compete directly with Disney. And it has DC Comics and a Batman movie coming out in a few years. We talked about that in the last episode. I really hope they're able to get something like Marvel going, but nobody has been able to crack that yet. And they also have the Harry Potter franchise, which also hasn't been performing for them. I think if they want to play on Disney's turf, they're going to need to do something with The Matrix. Remember, the Matrix simulation lived on at the end of Revolutions, so we could see what happens there. Put J.J. Abrams in charge of it, get the audiences out, make a nice PG-13 movie, maybe even get Keanu Reeves to come back and cameo as the new Oracle, just to throw one more wrench in the works.
I hate that idea, but it would totally work. I think a remake of the original movie or the whole Matrix trilogy is out of the question because, dodging bullets, red and blue pills, and quotes like, "there is no spoon," have been so ingrained into our minds. But the Matrix could easily become a generational event like Star Wars. They could bring back a piece of the saga every 15 years or so. There's a lot of Matrix lore, like with the Animatrix, so they have some existing material to pick and choose from, and they could easily get big names to work on the movie and be in it. All a new Matrix movie would really need is a good trailer with the green WB logo, and people will go see it.
Yeah, I think those opening titles were the best part of Matrix Revolutions. But if we aren't worried about making good movies, if it's just the box office sales, and it is, then you need to pander. I'm not saying it's new. It's kind of how the studios have always been. If there was a hit novel in the 1930s, you could be sure that a few years later there would be a film adaptation. But there used to be a lot more medium to large size studios. That's the difference between now and then. And they're slowly now being absorbed into one giant conglomerate. Most of the blockbuster movies on the 2019 and 2020 slates are Disney.
Yeah, so that's just our take on the whole situation. And we understand that some of you think you have some opinions, and we might say something stupid. So we need to hear from you. Like, what do you think about the stuff we're saying? Call us out if you need to.
We're doing this for fun, and so if the folks at home can have some fun with it, that's cool too. We've been getting great messages from you all. Sometimes we'll get, paragraphs of feedback, near essays on the latest episode, and we read through them and we think, okay, so we're absolutely crystal clear on what you don't like. So on that note, we do have a listener question. First up is Doug from Malta.
Yeah, Doug's got a hot take.
Hi there, Doug here from Malta. My question is concerning 2001 Space Odyssey. Do you think people just say they like that movie because they feel they should? Because if they don't, they'll get accused of just being stupid, not being able to understand the sheer complexity that engulfs every scene and every shot of that movie? Or do you think they genuinely like it? And I mean, if it's the latter, why do you think that? Because I've watched it, and I think it's utter garbage. And I mean, I love Stanley Kubrick movies, but not this one.
I like 2001: A Space Odyssey. For a while, it was at the top of my list of favorite movies. The reason I love it, though, to explain to Doug a little bit, is primarily the visual effects and the production design. Both of those have held up all of these years later. The effects are practical, of course. They couldn't do CGI in the late 60s. But what's interesting is, if you look up actual footage from outer space, whether it's the SpaceX Rocket Man launch or spacewalks filmed in the void of space, it looks like 2001: A Space Odyssey. It doesn't look like modern depictions of outer space, with the big bright star fields and nebulas filling out the background. Everything's perfectly lit. It looks raw and cold and dry, just like the 2001 effects. On the production design, there's one scene where one of the crew members is eating a meal and playing with an iPad. It literally looks like an iPad, and he's using it like I use my iPad when I'm eating, just kind of sitting there on the table, looking down, casually browsing. I do think the end, though, was laziness attempting to be artsy. When all else fails, kind of let the audience make up their own ending. This is an art film, and it's an art film in space, so it's not going to be for everybody.
I think I'm honestly with Doug, but I give 2001: A Space Odyssey credit for a lot of things. How the computer system guy, that's an iconic character. There's the song. Dun, 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 dun. There's a lot of deep meaning, a lot of symbolism. So it's always fun to go on YouTube and watch like an analysis video of all the little things you missed in 2001: A Space Odyssey. All that stuff is cool, but some hate though. This movie puts me straight into nap mode. And people call me No Nap Zach, so that's saying a lot. The very beginning of the movie is literally 2 minutes, 51 seconds of a black screen. Like, are you serious? Like, what's going on here? I love Stanley Kubrick, but those 6-minute shots of just a space station rotating in space, like, come on. Like, it's still a movie. You got to entertain us a little bit. And not to mention, it was totally wrong about the year 2001. You know, there's no commercial trips to the moon yet. Way off there. But yeah, so that's our thoughts. Doug, really appreciate you joining the convo. Also, we had some feedback from our last episode. In that episode, we compared the John Wick franchise to the Matrix. And one of our listeners didn't really appreciate that.
Analogy for you. It's like saying Jaws 1 is a better movie than any of the Men in Black movies, but taken as a whole, Men in Black is better than Jaws. It's a bit like saying that, but the problem is it's so ridiculous even to compare Jaws 1 with any of the Men in Black movies, because it's just completely different level.
This was an interesting piece of feedback. You know, the John Wick movies star Keanu Reeves and Lawrence Fishburne, who played, obviously, Neo and Morpheus in The Matrix. The director of the John Wick movies is Keanu Reeves' stuntman on the Matrix films, Chad Stahelski. And even the co-director of the first film was also a stuntman on The Matrix, David Leitch. They're both action movies with a ton of shooting. In fact, there are even some fan theories that the John Wick franchise is a prequel to the Matrix franchise, and that the events of the John Wick movies are a previous incarnation of the one. That's obviously not true. It's tinfoil hat conspiracy stuff, but it is interesting to think about. And the films have similar aesthetics, so I think that's why we are comparing them.
I also don't totally agree with the analogy. Maybe you can compare Jaws and The Matrix, but come on, Men in Black is Little League and John Wick is a legit franchise. That comparison is a ridiculous one to me.
But if you have an opinion on any one of our topics that we've discussed throughout any of these shows, let us know. If you think we're wrong about something, send us an audio clip with your take. Warning, we may use it.
All right, moving on to everybody's favorite part of the show, reviews. Each episode of The Fourth Wall, we give each other a recommendation. Cody recommends a movie for me to watch, and I recommend a movie for him to watch. So Cody, can you tell us a little bit about the movie you recommended for me this episode?
Yes, I recommended you watch Dog Day Afternoon, and that's a 1975 movie directed by Sidney Lumet, who directed 12 Angry Men. We were just talking about that earlier. And this movie is based on a real-life bank robbery that took place in Brooklyn in the 1970s. So in this movie, they go in to rob a bank for unusual reasons, we'll say. I recommended this to you because the performances are great. Al Pacino is fantastic in it. And so is his co-star, John Cazale, who's also a standout. Zach, what did you think about this movie?
All right, let's start with what I liked. The premise. I like the 70s New York City vibe. When I think of New York City in the late 70s, I just think of the griminess of all the movies like The Warriors and Taxi Driver. Plus, the crime rate in New York in like the second half of the 20th century was like insane. And I feel like all the characters in this movie captured that gritty vibe. The law enforcement characters were the best. There was a police chief, and he's wheeling and dealing with Al Pacino. And then once that guy can't really solve the problem, the FBI agents come in and like they're a level above, and you can just like feel their presence in the movie, and it's really cool. You know, as a Generation Y, millennial, I wasn't alive when Al Pacino became the legend he is today. But this was a good chance to see one of his best roles and, why he's such a legend. The other character, John Cazale, he plays such a creepy and unstable guy. And this actor, John Cazale, he acted in 5 movies before he died. All 5 of those were nominated for Best Picture. The 2 Godfathers, this movie, also The Conversation and Deer Hunter. So, yeah, both of those 2 stars were great in the movie. And there's also a bunch of other cool characters. If you've seen the movie, there's a bunch of bank tellers in it, and they're really funny. But let's go into what I didn't like. Dog Day Afternoon, I think, was 30 minutes too long. The whole irony of Al Pacino robbing a bank, but also being super sympathetic and noble in a lot of ways was cool, but that point got remade over too many times. There's a lot of great dialogue where people are playing mind games or just riffing, and it's great, but it also slows down and gets serious a lot, and I just kind of spaced out during these parts, and I found myself having to like rewind conversations to make sure I got everything. Overall, I liked it. 7 out of 10. The story's amazing and definitely worth a watch if you're a fan of Al Pacino. I just wish it was a little bit more trimmed down as a movie.
Yeah, that runtime criticism is fair. I also agree with the anti-hero thing was a little over the top at times. The crowds of people cheering outside of a bank in the middle of a robbery didn't feel super believable to me, even though, of course, it's based on a true story. I just wanted you to watch this movie for that great ending. So, Zach, you recommended Metro Manila to me. Can you tell us a little bit about that movie?
Yeah, it's a Southeast Asia movie set in Manila. Manila is kind of the New York City of the Philippines. A man and his wife, they have 2 kids. They're rice farmers, and after harvest one year, the price of rice has dropped so much that they can't get any money for their rice, so they're broke. And they just had a baby. The older daughter has a bad toothache. They have nothing, so they have no choice but to move to the big city, Manila, to find work. So they have nowhere else to live but the slums of Manila. They can only get bottom of the barrel jobs. And in this movie, you join this family as pretty much they just attempt to survive. This is like one of my favorite foreign movies. Cody, what did you think?
I really liked this movie. It was low budget, under 500,000. That kind of works though, because this is a movie about poverty. And the setting of it was great. It does a really good job of contrasting the poor suburban areas with the even poorer slums. And we get to spend a lot of time seeing that contrast happening. We also visit the metro areas a little bit, and it looks like any other city. It almost could be New York City. Although some of the long establishing shots showing off Manila maybe had 1 or 2 that felt like filler. Also, some of the montages cutting back and forth between different members of the family were good at first, but went a little long. It surprisingly had quite a bit of action for such a small movie, and I thought it used that tension fairly wisely. It's not quite like a rags to riches story in the traditional sense, but it does share some of those rags to riches themes. It almost reminds me of like a Grapes of Wrath mixed with Heat, the Michael Mann film. Because we go from a poor family trying to survive to what almost feels like a heist thriller. And that kept things really interesting. Heist movies are great, and this really spent every dollar of that budget trying to bring this story to life. Unfortunately, to make such a great movie, some other areas suffered. And that's where we get into my only real complaints about this movie. It was filmed using a Canon DSLR camera, and you can tell when you watch it in high resolution. The footage just kind of looks consumer grade, and it took me out of it at times. Despite that, though, I highly recommend everyone watch this movie, and I would give it a really strong 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I actually just rewatched it, and the visual and audio quality felt a little crappy at times, but I just thought that was an art thing. All right, so let's get into next episode's movie recommendations. Cody, what Winston Churchill era movie do I have the pleasure of watching next week?
So this one's a modern one, and it was made in 2015. However, it is an American film, so you still might not like it. It's called Bone Tomahawk. It's a horror western, which is a better genre pairing than you might expect. Like, the lonely, desolate setting works really well in a horror movie, and I hadn't seen a film quite like this until I watched it. It stars Kurt Russell and Matthew Fox from Lost in near perfect casting. Now, some could say this is typecasting because Kurt Russell always plays the cowboy dude. In this movie, he plays the sheriff of a small town in the old Wild West who learns of an external threat from a dangerous Native American tribe just outside town. I'm guessing this one will also get a 7 out of 10 for slowness in parts, but I think it's definitely worth a watch.
All right, I'll check it out. Cody, next week you're going to be watching another foreign film, but this one's in English. It's called Hot Fuzz. It's from the makers of Shaun of the Dead, and all I'll say about it is it's kind of like a British dark comedy, takes place in a British village. That's all I'm going to say.
I've heard of that one. It's an Edgar Wright movie, and I've liked his other stuff, so I'm definitely looking forward to that. For the folks at home, thanks again so much for listening and for the great feedback. Keep it coming. Also, if you get a chance, check out the movies we talked about this episode or the movies we will talk about in the next episode.
Yeah, keep sending us audio clips. Keep up the feedback. We like the negative feedback. We like to be called out if we're saying something stupid or you have a good opinion. And just subscribe. Just do it. Like we say every time, we just want to talk about movies. We really appreciate everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Fourth Wall.